We want to see a right to compensation if service quality levels are not met. We want access to information on their rights for consumers through bills and electricity company websites. We also want to make sure that people can change their supplier within a limited time framework. But also, we want people to be informed, at least quarterly, of actual electricity consumption and costs. We've heard of cases where people have not known what their electricity consumption is, and then suddenly they're given a bill after months, sometimes years, and many people, many companies, small companies in particular, have gone into liquidation because they haven't had that consistent information. We would stop that from happening, and as you've heard, we are also suggesting that vulnerable customers in particular should not be disconnected, in particular in winter. We also want the national regulatory authorities to take a much more proactive role in favour of consumers. We think for too long they've concentrated on the market issues. Let's get them concentrating on the consumers. And we don't think they've gone far enough in that area. So, we heard somebody ask earlier, you know, the problem is now. That's the problem. You have all these measures for the long term. But what are we going to do now? Well, the obvious answer is energy efficiency. Reduce the energy we use in the first place. There are countless ways for us to do this. Obviously, the main way for us to do it is through insulating our houses better. But we've got a long way to go. A recent report by the Welsh Audit Commission suggested that many local authorities across Wales were failing to meet those expected levels, in particular in the private sector. This is fundamental, I think, to cutting the bills of people within our households. The Welsh Assembly, I think, should be applauded for setting up the target that, as far as reasonably practicable, fuel poverty should be eradicated in vulnerable houses by 2010 and in all households by 2018. These are ambitious ambitions. But we've heard this morning that they're not just ambitions, there are some practical steps on how to get there. And the fact is that we have a really huge problem within Wales. We now have 250,000 people living in fuel poverty within our country. Vulnerable households, those over 60 or with children under the age of 16 or with their long-term sick, make up 86% of the fuel poor. So we have to ensure also that we address other issues, not just the issue of housing. The way people behave within their houses is absolutely critical. And this must lead to a behavioural change of the people who live in our households. Now, we should be doing a lot more to increase awareness of how we can all act better, act differently, behave better within our own homes, take that individual responsibility. Within the EU, we're trying to, again, set standards and frameworks so that things can be built in as soon as possible. Design directives we have to make sure that when things are being designed, especially consumer goods, fridges, etc., that we build in energy efficiency. And by setting the standards at a European level, you hear some politicians say, I'm going to get rid of the standby button on the TV. You can't do that from the UK's point of view. It has to be done on a European basis because we're in a common market. You have to abide by the rules of that market. But by setting the standards for 500 million people within the EU, you are also setting a global standard. So designing that eco issue into those consumer durables at the beginning of the process makes a huge amount of sense. But there's no reason why we can't be raising awareness, getting that link with the community through using convergence funding, for example, as Nick suggested earlier. The issue of energy poverty is not going to go away. It's an issue that I think will need our constant attention. Governments and organisations like yours can go so far, I think, in addressing the issue. But in the end, it will come down to the responsibility of the individual to change his or her way. I think a great deal of the answer to this question is in our own hands. We must learn from each other, we must educate ourselves and the people around us much better than we have done in the past. I think probably increasing energy prices will drive us into that direction anyway. But increasing awareness of the problem, I think, is the first step to addressing this incredibly crucial issue, which is affecting so many of the people in Wales in very dire ways today. Diolch yn fawr.